Let's do this for a database. So I happen to have this database here, this to-do store database. Now this to-do store database is definitely simple in its execution, but it has interesting things. We have a task and a task status. A task status is just a list of enumerations. The task links to that with a foreign key. We have an auto-incrementing primary key. So we have enough interesting things to be able to flex interesting concepts in databases. Here inside Visual Studio, I will close this solution, and I will create a new solution using what was formerly called ReadyRoll and is now called SQL Change Automation. So I'm going to create a SQL Change Automation project, and SQL Change Automation is a superset of database projects. So we get all the benefits of database projects, but we also then get migrations built in and the ability to execute it on a build server, which is really cool.
Now, is this something that comes with VS out of the box, or do you have to go buy it?
Is this something that comes with VS out of the box?
Because Redgate has dropped some goodies in there. I just haven't played with them.
SQL Change Automation Core comes in the box. But the full SQL Change Automation, the one I'm going to show you, is a separate purchase from Redgate.
Do you get the features in full, or can you get by with Core?
Can you get by with Core? I've heard mixed results. It doesn't do quite as much. Some of the things that are really elegant just aren't there, and that's a real bummer.
I remember with ReadyRoll before, it was full of ads. If you wanted to click on a feature, it would say, go buy our stuff.
I fear that there are ads in SQL Change Automation Core as well. You know, it's the freemium model, so you know.
They have to make some kind of money.
Yeah. So I'm going to create this project, and I start off with this prompt. Set up a new SQL Change Automation project. I'm going to say yes. Now I choose the database that I want to control, and I choose the database where I want to say, this is the beginning state. Now in this case, I'm going to say, I don't have a beginning state because, you know, let's pretend this is a greenfield project, but I could reference the last production backup schema if I wanted to as well. So I'm going to go grab that connection.
So this is only work for the SQL Server?
Yes, this is for SQL Server.
Doesn't work with NoSQL or CosmoDB?
This is not for a NoSQL database. This is specifically for SQL Server. But similar products exist for Oracle. And MongoDB being schemaless, you kind of don't need to send a schema to Mongo. You just kind of need to make sure the database exists.
What about the data inside?
What about the data inside? Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a different problem, though.
Yeah. Usually at that point, I write a little node script that connects to my Mongo and blasts in the data that I need. But yeah, how do I do data transformations inside Mongo? Yeah, that is a different problem. So I've chosen my development database, and I'm not going to choose a production one, choosing a greenfield thing. Finish. And now it'll walk me through grabbing all of the schema out of my database. I'm going to click refresh.
So you're recommending this one for the development and the integration, but not production?
You can use this for production as well. You can use it in all the environments.
How can handle the data then?
Yeah, if your DevOps people will let you. How's it push data in? That's a good question. Let's.
Not to just push data. How is syncing it? At the same time, the people are using, or if users are using, is locking the database.
Yeah. How does it sync? That's cool. Let's see if we can tie this into TeamCity and Octopus Deploy.
Goes to one of them updates, and the other one updates automatically or something?
Yeah. Ask me that again when we get to the Octopus Deploy step, because we'll watch Octopus push to the database. It'll be pretty cool.
But your database is not clustered, right?
Right now, I have this database, which I'm calling my dev database, my local database. I have this database that is on the dev server. And right now, it doesn't have any tables in it. And I have this database that I'm considering on the test server. And it doesn't have any tables in it as well.
So if there's some transaction going
Yeah, it'll just wait. If something's happening, it'll just wait. Yeah. This is going to be so awful if this fails. Sometimes this gets stuck. And I've opened a bug with Redgate about this. And they can't get it to happen. And I can't get it to happen consistently. But I've gotten it to happen on stage twice now.
In other words, you got to stop stepping on stage?
Yeah. I got to stop stepping on stage. And then it'll be fine. What's funny is it's having difficulty connecting to the database. And so if I try again, generally it's fine. It just has to time out doing its thing.
So is enterprise version of Visual Studio has this in it or not?
Visual Studio Enterprise includes SQL Change Automation Core. Other versions of Visual Studio don't include SQL Change Automation at all. And the SQL Change Automation Pro one is a separate purchase, no matter what Visual Studio you've got.
Good.
Yeah, from Redgate.
What's the price difference is enterprise and professional?
What's the price difference? I'm not sure. If I remember right, it's in the $500 range, but it might be $2,000 or $3,000. Yeah, while we're waiting for that to time out, let's go look. SQL Change Automation, free trial.
Are you run any runtime unit test on the Visual Studio?
Um, unit tests on Visual Studio? That is a good question. I'm not running tsqlt tests in this demo, but those are definitely worthwhile things to do. tsqlt can be really, really powerful. Approaches. Oh, download, but it's not going to take me to the buy link. That's interesting. I wonder if the freemium model kicks in there too, where, you know.
What's it, 14 days?
I believe it's a 30-day trial. It might be a 90-day trial. I'm not sure.
They usually give 2 weeks.
They usually give 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Then I was wrong.
No, they may give it to you. because
Oh, yeah.
they are-
I don't know. I might get it for 2 weeks. Maybe my trial just expired, and that's why I can't get to. No, I'm just kidding. OK, so it finally connected. It pulled in those two tables, and it asked me then to import and generate script. So I'm going to import and generate script, and it will then create this migration that identifies the content that I have in my schema. Now, this is the difference between the Pro and the non-Pro version. The Pro version dumps out all of the tables and all of the things so that I can commit those and reference them as I'm doing, git blame to try and figure out when columns were created or removed. But in the free version, then these pieces don't exist. So here's that migration script. And this migration script then details how to get from the state of not having a database, well, to having a blank database, to having a database that does all of these things. That looks great. So I'm going to come in here to, because it's built on top of a SQL Server project, and SQL Server projects automatically deploy as part of a build, I'm going to uncheck deploy here in the configuration manager. SQL Server projects presume that the master copy is inside Visual Studio, and SQL Change Automation shifts that to say the master copy is inside SSMS. So inside SSMS, I'm going to go create all my content, and then as I pull it in, I get these migration scripts. This same migration script then will run on every server that I deploy it to.
What was your data access layer? Did you have any data access layer?
What is the what access?
Data access layer?
The data access layer? In this case, this is just SQL scripts, but I could use Entity Framework, or I could use Dapper, or whatever I put into my application to reach into SQL Server to get my data. I could use that. This is just about deploying the database schema. OK, so here inside this SQL Server project, I've got this gitignore file. I'm going to open that up in code. And I'm going to make a little bit simpler one. Star.suo, star.sln, no, not sln, user. And I'll probably grab a few more interesting things, like the big one that I hit is this, dbml and jfm. Those are files that SQL Change Automation uses internally to keep track of stuff. You know, they're little databases. By the way, my machine wouldn't back up because they were locked because I left Visual Studio open one day. So, you know, excluding those from source control is kind of important. Oh, and here's why the VS Core build didn't build. I didn't save. Git status, git commit, git add, git commit -m, build.bat changed, git push origin master. Let's see that do interesting things as it goes. OK, so here's a different gitignore that will ignore those things. Git add all the things, git commit -m, SQL Server, git push origin master, which doesn't exist. Let's go back to our fake GitHub. New folder, SQL database, SQL database. Git init --bear. And there is our fake GitHub. Git remote add origin. There's that. Git push origin master. We've now got our content pushed into GitHub. Would we choose to include this project in with the other projects in our solution? Do we want this in a separate repository that is pushed separately? That's a great question for your architecture. There are benefits to having a repository per system, and there are benefits to a monorepo, a repository for them all. But here in TeamCity, because we have a separate repository, let's go create a new project for this SQL Server. So I'm going to create this new project. Create. I will create a build configuration. And this is old hat by now. I'll attach it to Git. Here's my Git repository. Here's my Git URL. I like showing names. Triggers, I'm going to add a new trigger that is the version control trigger. Save. In this case, we won't run tsqlt, so I won't change the failure conditions, but I am going to go into the general settings, and I'm going to change the build counter to 1.0 point. That will make the NuGet packages happier. Add a build step. Now, I've uploaded the SQL Change Automation plugin into TeamCity. If you're using Azure DevOps, it's already there. And so I'm just going to pick it, and now I have some interesting things. I'm going to do a SQL build. Build. What is a SQL build? Well, what it does is it checks out all these scripts, it creates a new database, it applies them all to the database, and it sees if that works. It builds a database. Oh, OK. The SQL Change Automation project, that is the project that we have right here. Not that one. To-do store, to-do store.sqlproj. What if I have new indexes? Great question. What happens if I change my schema? Let's come back to that. I wish I had this button to browse the repository, but I don't, so I have to actually put that into place. But you notice I'm building the project, not the solution. I could delete the solution out of this project if I wanted to, and that's pretty cool. NuGet package ID. I would like this to be called to-do store. Is that right? Yes. This will not only apply that content, it will also build an octopus deploy NuGet package. Where would I like this to happen? I'll choose local DB. That's great. But I could also point it at a particular SQL server and have it do it there, which is interesting. Local DB is just fine in this case. Save. Now I have that SQL build. Now the next step is to do, so let's go build that database. Do I have any changes to push? I do not, so let's just go trigger that build. That's not it. Run.
Rob, to circle back around to the Pro version, only included.
The Pro version is only included in the SQL tool belt. That is interesting. It's not available as a separate purchase anymore?
Not available as a separate purchase.
That's interesting.
And what's the tool belt cost?
Tool belt, let's see. That's not cheap.
No?
It's a little more than 5,000.
5,000. Well, how much value is this package delivering? They're going to pay you to do this by hand. $5,000 for a tool versus $5,000 for a person. That's, what? A week's salary? A month's salary?
$3,000 per license with 1 year support.
Ah, $3,000. Nice. So that. Go get that build deployed to Octopus. So I'm going to and .NET Core now. That was pretty cool. Projects. Add a project. I'm going to call this Southeast Valley.NET User Group SQL Server. Yep. SQL. Them are community provided, which is really cool. And one of them that's automation. So step one is package step. This is the deploy step that we use that new this SQL step. Run on targets. I want this to run on the SQL machines. Package the to-do store. you're successful, by all means.
Where what Rob is showing would take all of those.
Be more effective.
So this is more tool that a DBA would use.
So if you have entity framework, you say you can't do it.
If I have Entity Framework, I've already solved this problem, and I don't need to solve this problem this way. Deploy.
Not that connection. So you web API to here, how you connect it?
Oh, how do I set the connection strings?
Basically, question what's your data access layer?
Yeah. Here inside SQL Server, we're not worried about data access layer. That's in my application. That's the part that we did in .NET Framework.
Framework migration route, if all you need to worry about is tables. But if your architecture doesn't have a tool like Entity Framework Migrations, what Rob is showing is what you could use to actually automate all of your change management.
You're right. Entity Framework is kind of the Microsoft Works of it because it includes Excel and PowerPoint and migrations and code first. And if you're using a different data access strategy like Dapper that doesn't have migrations built in, you'd reach for a tool like this.
I still didn't get if I'm designing as architect, right? This does not work with entity framework. Is that true?
That is not right. Let's take this question offline because I like where you're going, but all of the SQL tagged servers, like I tagged the web server. Password, let's come back to those because that'll be really cool. They're optional right now, which is really nice. And I will save that. Now, I would like to specify the passwords, the usernames and passwords as variables. Those will be system-specific things. And this with other variables in level variables, scope to Valley.NET User Group SQL Server deployment project. And let's create a variable called database username. And this will be octopus deploy. Of course, typing the username is the hardest part of the entire demo. And I can define my scope. Now this, I'll use the same username in both environments, so I won't pick a scope. But role, I will environment variable, or that variable. sensitive, and now that's gone. And that will be for dev, for SQL roles. And then I'll add another value. Did I spell it right? Yep. And that will be so I've defined this database password and database username as variables. I could have pulled them in from web configs, or I could have pulled them in from other things. But in this case, I kind of like having them set here. I could then but if I unbind this and instead, it makes sense that those in interesting places. For builds. Previously. my stuff is done. It's going to automatically apply that change to my database. And that's how I modify schema, add indexes, add other columns, split tables, name tables. I'll just create these migration scripts and I'll commit them to source control. TeamCity will build them. Octopus Deploy will deploy them. So here's the master question. In an app experience, we created this DevOps pipeline. And we focused on the middle steps, but usually these DevOps pipelines will start at a customer suggestion. We'll grab that customer suggestion and we'll put it in our task tracking system like Jira or something like that, Azure DevOps boards. We'll go grab the code. We'll change code, commit that to our build server. The build server will run the tests. We used Octopus Deploy to push it out to a dev or test server. And once that's good, we'll push it out to production and we'll be able to deliver customer value. We focused on these middle steps. Here's the magic question. Where's the master copy? GitHub. I check out the content. That is the master copy. I can rebuild all the rest of this if I have that. If my production server catches fire, if my production data center falls into the sea, that's actually pretty cool, data centers in the sea. I can get everything back from here. So we built a database pipeline. Where's the master copy for databases? Where's the unique data? There. That's where the process starts. We start with production, and we roll it back this way to get to where we need to do. Are we going to do a production recovery, in which case we'll take a production backup and we'll restore it to production? Are we doing a pre-release validation? We'll take a production backup and we'll restore it to QA. If we want to go this way, so far we've talked about deploying that way. Well, we want to get a database this way so that a developer can start with the schema that exists in production, migrate it up using SQL change automation, and get it to the state that they want it to. The build server can go grab the database backup and get it to where it needs to go. So now, by the time we've deployed, we have run all of our migrations a lot of times on the real database and hit all of the interesting things. Now, there's a couple of things that we need to do here. We need to probably shrink the database. We probably need to anonymize it in some way, HIPAA and PCI or things. We probably need to optimize, shrink, sanitize, and anonymize. So in the sanitize step, there may be secrets that we want to keep in production that we don't want to leak into other environments, like the SA password. We may have some configuration details in the configuration table. Towards condensing it, we probably have a very big database. Now, each of these environments needs different steps, different things. Developers probably want a really, really small database so it'll be fast. But pre-production probably needs to be really, really close to production. So we won't compact that database very much. So we're going to sanitize, anonymize, and shrink data in different ways to get to different places. Let's do that. Let's build that last piece of the DevOps pipeline to get the database into a developer's hands as a Docker container.
Can you show one more time ops and the differences?
What's the difference between a database DevOps pipeline and an app DevOps pipeline? In an apps DevOps pipeline, source control is the master copy, and we can rebuild everything from scratch. In databases, the production database is the master copy, because if we lose customer data, bad things happen. Companies don't fail because the application went offline for an hour. Companies fail because their data got hacked, not their application.
So this is like you're saying, if you start code first, if you start other one database first, similarities. I know it's not.
Code first and database first aren't really the analogies here. This is about the database schema and the database data.
But at the same thing, if you start from the database first, gets the data from the database, then you start working.
We're about the database schema and the database data. And so let's do that. Now we're going to work with a little bit different database here than we had last time. Here we have this customer database. We have an invoice log. We have some settings here.
I didn't get if there the index changes, where this data is stored and how they update the schema, then update the database.
If I have a schema change,
No, if you have an index change, let's say you have a huge index change in an effect like recompile, it has to recompile, then the same data doesn't fit, you has to move this data temporary place, has to build it and move back this data with the foreign key constraints and all other ones.
the changing of the indexes will happen here in these migration files.
Right, if there is an index, the data, what happened to the data? You can't create just index change because you have data.
Right. So I did that here where I said, I need to migrate data on the way through creating schema alterations.
So how it does on the data?
How does it do it with the data? Right there.
So it just puts
I massaged the data there. In this case, I did it in place, but I could create a temporary table or I could copy the data, yeah. But let's get back to getting data into developers' hands. Here's my application. I've got some customers. Thank you to I have it buried. Thank you to the site that gave me this, and I'll reference them again later. I've got some invoice logs, great invoices here. I have, the invoice number and the date. Woohoo! And I have some settings here, and these settings are the things that I want to worry about. Copy with headers. So I've got this production secret. I definitely don't want that to leak out of production. I want to sanitize that on the way through. And I've got this build date. I just put this in here so that we can see as this process runs. But probably we're migrating secrets in here, not these settings. But OK, so I start with a database backup. And that database backup probably ran last night or whenever it ran. And it probably already runs. If it doesn't, you've got bigger problems in this talk. Don't listen to the rest of the talk. Run and go back up your database. This is a full database backup. So I've got this database backup now right here, this production database backup. Now what I traditionally do is I'll kick this off shortly after the database backup finished from a TeamCity build. And it will go do this process. So now I want to anonymize, sanitize, and shrink the data. So let's start by doing exactly that. Here's this script that will anonymize, sanitize, and shrink the data. Towards sanitizing, I'm going to just set the email to some new ID at contoso.com. Just change it so I don't accidentally email my customers. Thank you to randomuser.me for my user database. I'm going to update the settings to a dev-safe setting for this particular API key. Now I'm no longer leaking those production secrets into developers' hands. And then I'll just update the build date to right now, just so that we can track that it happened, which is pretty cool. I'm going to shrink the data by carefully deleting all of the things that never happens in this case. But that's how I would kind of trim out stuff and get a reasonable subset of the data. I want to ensure that I get enough weird things that developers experience these problems too, and we don't discover data anomalies only in production. So I'm not going to trim it to only the most recent year, but I'll trim out some stuff so that ultimately my database will be smaller. I'm going to truncate the log file by setting the recovery to simple. It's no longer in full mode now. Now it's in simple mode. And I'll shrink the database to get it to be smaller. I'm also now going to autofix the app user, the user that the application uses to connect to the database, and set its password to something that developers can set. I don't need to set my SA password. I don't need to give developers now my SA password. It's, it's here. And then I'll alter login and set that to the dev safe password as well. I could set this to a different password. But now developers pulling this Docker container can connect as SA and do whatever they need to do, pull those changes into SQL change automation, and get those out into production. Now this starts off by restoring this database and moving it to var opt. That doesn't start with C:. Yes, we're going to do this on SQL Server on Linux. We took a Windows production database backup, and we're going to restore it into a SQL Server Linux instance. Now we have this Docker file here that's going to do exactly that. And so we start from Microsoft SQL Server Linux. And then we set that workdir to temp. We'll copy in the database backup. We'll copy in that script, the one that we just saw. And then we'll run SQL Server. We'll accept the EULA. And we'll sleep for 60 seconds. This is a guessing game. How long does it take the container to start up? Usually it's like 10 to 15 seconds. A friend of mine likes to set it to 90 because, just in case the demo fails. And then he's going to run. Then we'll run the SQL command connecting to that localhost database, the one that we just started right here. And we will run this script against that database. Once this script finishes, we will kill SQL Server. And now we've got that anonymized, sanitized, and shrunk database copy here inside the container. Now we're building this in the container. And so as Docker does, it will create a new layer for each command. So technically, we still have the non-anonymized, sanitized, and shrunk data here. We don't want to publish this container, so we're going to start a new container. This is called Docker multi-stage builds. And we're going to create a second container and then copy that SQL Server database from the other one. We're not copying the database backup. We're not copying the sanitization script. We're only copying the database into this new container. Docker build -t. Where's my handy dandy cheat sheet? There it is.
SQL Server means they can connect Linux database.
Yes, they can. So I'm going to build that SQL Server. We're going to wait 60 seconds. On Linux. You can't use Azure, yeah, you're going to pay for it. This is an on-prem deployed database. This is not a cloud-scaled database. So there's that Docker container, dev database. Docker environment that we like. I happen to be using Minikube as my Docker environment. And so here's that virtual machine that Docker is running in. And I'm going to say Docker run, that's not it. Docker run, let me actually grab it this way. Docker run -p 1433 to 1433, so it's going to nat this automatically into the container, and I'm going to run that dev database container. Now, developers can do this at the beginning of the day. They can pull down the latest version of the Docker container, or whenever they're ready to try out the latest production build, they can pull, and this data will be anonymized, sanitized, and shrunk to match their needs. So it's going to fire up SQL Server. Now, SQL Server already has that database attached. And so now if I come in here to SQL Management Studio, I'm going to connect to that database. I'll connect to Minikube. I'm using that dev safe password here.
Minikube is your virtual server name?
Minikube is my Docker runtime environment.
Your Docker runtime.
Yeah. So I'm going to create a new query. Select star from dbo.customer. And I'll see that all of my customer email addresses are some big long GUID at contoso.com. I didn't leak my production data into developers' hands. And we can see that all of the invoices are there. And if we look at the settings, copy with headers, I'll come back over here where I can zoom in a little bit better. Here are the dev safe settings. And it was built right now. Well, right now UTC. Wow, I'm tired. It's 3 a.m.
So it's going one back. So you just selected a couple of columns and you said change these columns so you cannot read.
Yes. I just changed the data that I didn't want to get out of the production cage. Changed that. I didn't encrypt it. I just changed it.
So just change is temporary.
I changed it permanently in the database that I then handed to developers' hands.
Changed in the copy.
Yeah, changed in the copy. The production database is OK. I started with a production database backup. I restored it and did all the things.
When you deploy that, then you're going to change again?
Next time I deploy it, this anonymize, sanitize, and shrink step won't happen there. This anonymize, sanitize, and shrink step as we go this way. So we'll modify that script if we want to go here. We'll anonymize, sanitize, and shrink less. If we want to go all the way to here, we're going to anonymize, sanitize, and shrink a lot. So we may end up with a dev script, a test script, and a prod script. And so we may end up with 3 containers, and that's totally fine. Those 3 containers then automatically get deployed to a Docker registry, such as Azure Container Service. And then developers, when they're ready, can just pull down those containers and begin running.
Well, I don't get the part. OK, you changed some of the columns. You did something about it. Not read. So you made your changes on the code. You push them back now. How do you get them back?
I changed the columns in the database backup that I'm sending this way.
OK, I got that.
So developers don't have the data that is safe here. They do have the schema. And if they migrate the schema, they'll use SQL change automation to get the schema changes going this way. But we're probably not going to push data this way. We may push lookup tables, but we're not going to push those secrets this way. So developers will never have that production secret that's stored safely right here.
Okay. So let's say we have an issue, issue like the customer doesn't give you a good sample database. So So can we use this as a solution? Like, okay, can you give me a backup? What's important? If there's a social security number, just what's that called? Sanitize it.
Yeah.
Sanitize that.
Yep. Sanitize your data
and
and
give us the database.
yeah, exactly.
And this one,
Keep the production data safe here. Let's run this script automatically to sanitize, anonymize, and shrink the data appropriate for its use case that complies with HIPAA and PCI requirements and gets our data quickly into developers' hands where they have their own Docker container, their own environment, that they can burn down all the time without trashing production.
but if there is a foreign key, then what happens? Let's say
They have the entire database.
let's say they are using email addresses as
Mhm.
ID, then if you sanitize email ID,
Yeah, if you're using,
and you're not gonna.
if you're trying to anonymize data and you're changing primary keys, that gets hairy.
Database badly, then yeah, it sucks to be you.
But it's custom,
Yeah.
you can't change custom.
If you're using the database badly, it hurts.
But the customer created like 10 years ago, you don't have control on it. But
Yeah.
you need this system to work.
Well,
So the last time,
say, well, the email addresses are going to
No,
be
the
the email
state, they
addresses.
don't do that. They have their own,
I know, I work for the state.
which division?
Supreme Court.
Supreme Court.
so a database backup
Yeah,
is only
all
as
about PCI, personal information, sanitizing data. Yeah, been there, done that.
a database backup is only as good as the last time you restore it.
Right.
And I kick off a job inside TeamCity that restores it every day. We saw then how we can get all of our changes, both in code and in databases, this way into production in an automatic way. Now, we did all of this with applications, .NET Core, .NET Framework, and database in a few hours. It may take you a few days or a few weeks to get to this level, and then you may want to go further, running more automated tests, running Selenium tests that can flex your application in interesting ways. This process is not hard. Here's my challenge. Do it. As Donovan Brown says, don't ask for permission, just do it. This is easy, and this will net you a lot of benefit really quickly. By having an automated process that does the hard things in a very predictable way, you can succeed.
The large groups, they usually have DevOps division, and they responsible of these, right?
Yep. If you're the DevOps engineer, this is what you do.
The single hardest thing to do is educate DevOps to understand that this is okay.
Yes.
I've been down this path many times.
Yeah, managing up is hard. And so that's what we've got. Any questions?
Well, first of all, excellent job. Thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Thanks. This was a lot of fun.
Wow.